Alright YouTube, it's time for the Occult, video 91, the Law of Contagion. It's a fairly straightforward and simplistic concept, one that I happen to generally endorse, which is that is within a spiritual context specifically, although it goes a little bit further than that, as I'll try to explain. When people practicing occultism of one form or another with objects or venerating certain deities, or they have a physical book or something, when things come into contact or into a mental or practical interplay, they contaminate one another with energy or occult forces or psychic, cosmic stuff, whatever you want to term it, and lacking a proper banishment, and I don't happen to endorse that part of it, by the way. Lacking a proper banishment or separation, they remain entangled. I look at spooky entanglement being apparently true, and I look at some of the physical aspects of how particles interact, and I say, well, it does seem to have a physical component to sort of explain the spiritual. One of the things that's always at work within a spiritual context, this is the case with alchemy turned chemistry. It's the case of like earlier philosophies versus the Enlightenment era stuff. It's the case with all of these different developments in human consciousness. Oftentimes the spiritual describes something that is eerily akin later to what comes to be recognized as factual science. For instance, when Sargon, or when somebody else asks me, oh, why call it magic? Why not just call it propaganda or something? You're not understanding what the term magic actually means. Or occultism in general. It's hidden. It's hidden. It's not necessarily spiritual in the sense of spooky dooky, there's a god above us. It's something hidden that's not fully understood, that's not quantifiable in secular terms. Therefore, when you speak about it, you recognize its reality first and foremost through anecdotal experience or whatever it happens to be. You're describing something in what most people would consider spiritual terms that may not always be looked at that way, number one. For instance, with memetics, it's real. Okay, this style of propaganda goes well above and beyond the kinds of material from our past. People are having some degree of difficulty quite comprehending how these things work so well, or seem to work so well, outside of a spiritual context. They then drag the spiritual in. The fact that 100 years from now somebody might discover some weird physical interaction that goes on in the human mind that fully describes this concept doesn't mean it's not occultism, because occultism doesn't just have to do with bed knobs and broomsticks sort of magic. That's not reality. The law of contagion looks eerily reminiscent of how people are beginning to describe quantum entanglement or something of that nature. I like to think that it goes deeper, though, than just the truly mundane physical aspect and into the more abstract human mind. If a person is involved with an occult practice, let's say they're a black magician or something. They have a book of spells that some book of shadows where they've written all their recipes for poisons and all their experiments and stuff. Then they give it up and they say, well, I'm not doing that. I'm a Christian now. They might consider that book to be accursed in some manner. And it doesn't even matter, by the way, if anybody else knows about this practice. Just their mental awareness of what they think is the accursed nature of this object really demonstrates, in a way, the law of contagion, because for them it will have a residual negative energy. Others may sense it too, simply by picking up the minute faces that they make looking at the book, or when they just talk about their former practice. Another person gets an energy from that. It's in the human mind. It's a physical phenomena, but it's not easily described. We don't even quite know how all aspects of the human mind works. We're still talking about, is bundle theory true or something else? People don't quite know how a lot of this is philosophical. A lot of it's completely subjective. And it's going to take us a long time to fully comprehend these things. When I label something occult or I label it magic, in some cases I'm pointing out fraud. In some cases I say, well, I'm skeptical of X, Y, and Z. That's true. But even where I'm tolerating of something, or I openly endorse a specific idea, like the basic tenet of the law of contagion, it doesn't mean that what I'm saying is, oh, well, that book that you were practicing dark magic with has a demon in it, so now you have to perform an exorcism or a banishing ritual. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it doesn't matter whether it takes place in the spiritual realm, strictly speaking, the mental realm, or something else, the strictly physical realm. We're talking about some weird quantum interaction or something like that. But I do happen to believe in it. If a person who is engaged in occultism has trappings that they use in that occultism, they take on certain characteristics within their own mentality and anyone else that's aware of them, and they become, in a way, consecrated or desecrated or filled with what you would consider energy of one sort or another. You can call this a completely mental phenomenon if you want. It doesn't denigrate from the fact that their mood changes in association with these things. It's like the ritual trappings I spoke of prior, like crystals and stuff like that. If a person surrounds themselves with things that to them don't mentally vibe with an occult practice, for instance, some black magician is surrounded by little pink kitty cat statuettes and happy, rainbow posters and stuff, yeah, probably not as good for the mentality of performing that ritual. They're going to not feel quite as much into it as if everything's black and dimly lit by a bunch of oil lamps and, there's a cauldron in front of them or something like that, if that's what bodes well as far as the mental imagery associated with their practice. For white magic, it'd be the same. A person wouldn't perform a bunch of healing arts necessarily in a black robe with a human skull in their hand. No, they'd probably wear white. They'd have the crystal wand and, the fake elf ears and stuff like that. It's just, it bodes well for their mentality when trying to perform such ritualism. Other people might have disagreement as well. For instance, imagery that's associated with evil in one culture may be associated with good in another. And you have like skulls, the spooky dookie witches and black cats skulls. Go to Mexico now and go to the Day of the Dead, a very reverent thing. Yeah, it has to do with spirits, but it's more reverent. It's almost ancestral worship after a fashion. You're probably licking the little candy skulls down there. It's not necessarily quite as foreboding, quite as dark. You're not necessarily practicing literal necromancy at the time, now are you? Two different cultures, two different takes on the same general imagery. So that would be in play as well. The law of contagion has to be subjugated to cultural understanding first and foremost. Otherwise, it's useless. It doesn't quite get interpreted properly by a person witnessing that kind of ritualism if they're from a totally different culture. Because a color that might be considered a dark warning color in the West might not be in the East, or it might be circumstantial. It might be that it has no real meaning. You could have some primitive tribe that doesn't even have a word for like blue or something. They see colors as just shiny or not shiny, like the wet and dry tribes that still exist. They just have that sort of terminology, and so it goes into the nature of reality a little bit. I choose to believe that the law of contagion in some form is generally true. Not necessarily in the sense of, you have to banish this energy when you're done consecrating this wand, perform this ritual. I don't think that's necessarily, strictly speaking, something that you have to do, but at the same time, the general concept, if that's what helps a person, they certainly should, I do tend to believe in. That's about all. Peace out.